Welcome back. So some South Africans are unhappy with the functioning of democracy. That's according to the latest pre-election study from the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation. So 1,800 South Africans were asked about their likelihood to vote, the key issues that will be decisive for their choice, and which party they're most likely to support. Let's unpack these findings and explore their implications for South Africa's political future. For that, we're joined by the Head of Research and Policy at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Jan Hofmeyr. Jan, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I want to ask about why this particular survey is so important when, in the run-up to elections, we have seen so many polls looking at what South Africans deem important and also the political parties that they believe are their front runners.
Yes, good morning, Naledi, and thanks so much for having me. So maybe just a bit of context. The survey was conducted by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation on behalf of Afrobarometer. And Afrobarometer is a continental survey that really looks at long-term trends in people's perceptions around governance as it pertains to politics and governance, etc. And so that's really our interest. And this is a part of a panel study. We have been interviewing people in the past month about these issues, but we will replicate this study also after the elections, going back to exactly the same people to see what the impact has been, whether their expectations have been met. So this is a deeper study. It's far more than just polling. It is also looking at those deeper drivers of people's attitudes towards democracy and the things that animate them as citizens and that are important to them.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised that one of your findings is that a lot of South Africans are unhappy with the way their democracy is functioning. I mean, we've run happiness barometers, for instance, in the country, and those have shown that South Africans, for the most part, are dissatisfied. But explain why this is particularly important, that they're unhappy with the functioning of our democracy.
Yes, I think that's a really important distinction that we need to make. When we look at South Africans' needs around governance, we see that they want transparent government. They want government that is responsive to them, and they want to elect those people that can represent them to execute their mandate. But what we do see is that people feel that they do not get that. So we should not interpret this as a vote for authoritarian government, but rather an indication of how dissatisfied South Africans are with the way in which democracy has been sort of unfolding in South Africa, and they're expecting more from it than what they're getting at the moment.
Okay, you've looked at quite a few themes here, and of course one of them being around the political party that they want to vote for. But before we actually get there, let's talk about the issues that are important. I think there's the assumption that South Africans really are more concerned as they make that decision with the individual character politics, but they are interested in the issues as well, right?
Yes, most definitely. The ones that stood out in the survey, and has not really been a surprise because we've been seeing them since about 1999 when we've been doing these surveys, is firstly the question of unemployment, because unemployment is so closely linked to the other issues of poverty and inequality. About 71% of our respondents said to them this is the key issue that is important to them also in this election and the manifestos that will be coming out. The second one, also no real surprise, but also a more recent entry, is the question of secure electricity provision. And this has also got a knock-on effect on people's lives. It's not only about lights out at 8 o'clock in the evening, but also people who cannot do their business and dependents that are affected by it. And then thirdly, the question of corruption, the fact that money is not going where it's supposed to be going. So those are our top three ones, but the others relate to questions of cost of living. And an interesting entry also in this year's survey is the question of water provision. Increasingly, people are also getting worried about safe and secure provision of clean water.
It's interesting that housing sits a lot lower on that list, though, with only 10% of South Africans really concerned about housing, when it is such a big talking point for our politicians.
I mean, indeed, it is. Housing is an important area of delivery. We've asked our respondents to prioritize
Yeah.
the specific needs to them, and these are sort of the top three that came out for us. But indeed, in many parts of the house, of the country, housing is a pressing problem that affects people.
Okay, and then with the satisfaction with democracy, 1% of South Africans saying that the country simply is not a democracy. I'm keen to hear if you got reasonings from them.
Well, that 1% is a very, very small percent of the sample, and so one can really sort of speculate where that sentiment comes from. I think it might be also sort of people who live at on the margins of society, who do not have access to many of the things that that our democracy promises them.
Yeah.
But that is really sort of a concern. I think if you look at the other end of the scale, we've also seen sort of a decline in the number of people over the years, or the percentage of people who feel that we live in a democracy that really works for them. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting though, and perhaps encouraging, that 36% of people say that they're very satisfied in our democracy though.
Indeed.
Yeah. Let's look at other numbers then that you've looked at. Overall direction of the country, I think that's a really interesting one. There's so much concern about what South Africa will look like post the 29th of May 2024. And you've looked at, you've asked them if they feel that the overall direction of the country is moving in the wrong or right direction.
Yes. Look, I think if you look at that, it is a fairly pessimistic finding, with a very high percentage of our respondents indicating that we're going in the wrong direction. If you look at those key problems that they have indicated, it's probably not a surprise. Many people in South Africa are experiencing the pressures of a high cost of living, a rising cost of living, and they've really felt it over the past couple of years. So yes, I think it is not surprising. If you look at at the broader context sort of in the world, globally, people are struggling with cost of living issues, and I think if you replicate a survey like this, you would also see big differences in the levels of optimism today and 10 years ago. But this is the particular context for South Africa, and this is also the context that politicians will have to respond to in the next decade or so, and that is what they also, or the reason why they're also looking at political parties next week when they're going to vote.
But you got to look at the stark difference between how South Africans responded to how they feel about the overall direction of the country back in 2011 versus what that looks like in 2024. That really stood out for me. I mean, exactly right down the middle, half of the respondents felt that the country was moving in the right direction, the other half saying they're moving in the wrong direction. But this year, 85% concerned about the direction of the country.
Yes, I mean, I think if one sort of looks at the context, because it's also really important to bear in mind that what the juncture was where we conducted the survey in 2011, I think was shortly after the global financial crisis. We at that particular time we saw a lot of jobs being shed, but the longer term impact took years, and of course in between what was also happened was the COVID pandemic, which had a devastating effect on the South African economy, and we have seen how drastic that was, almost an overnight shock to the economy. So I think many things have happened in between. I think our concern is how has government, how has the state dealt with that particular circumstances? Are citizens feeling that government is doing their best in order to address the circumstances that citizens are facing?
Okay, and just quickly, are they going to be voting then?
Well, what we see is that about sort of 86% of our respondents have indicated that they've registered. About 90% of them have indicated that they are going to vote. But the interesting thing is that about a third of those who indicated that they will vote have not yet made up their mind who they will vote for. And this is also another interesting finding, is that almost half of our respondents don't feel close to any political party. So parties in this election cannot simply rely on past loyalty of their supporters.
Yeah, well, we wait to see next week, and around this time next week, we'll start to see, I suppose, the difference that third is making to the power dynamics in the country. Jan, thank you so much for your time.